For the record, I'm so glad that you clicked on this video. Research methods is not the most sought after content on the internet, and for many, the subject matter is a necessary evil for what is deemed as a more practical or ideal goal. But if we're going to talk about relationships, folks, it's important to have scientific standards that we use to separate conjecture or opinion from evidence-based findings. The Checkout Owl magazines and family members and friends are not short on advice for relationships. Don't even let me start talking about the content that you can find online. You see, everyone has a hashtag relationship goals picture, a story, or a piece of advice. Some of it is good in that it's based on science or stuff that really works, and other stuff may be based on idiosyncratic experience, speculation, and even stereotypical and trite sayings. So how do you differentiate what is based in the evidence versus something that just worked for someone but may not be applicable to the majority? And what types of research methods are employed to unpack the dynamic that all of us humans are so eager to have? We'll talk about that in this lecture. We'll talk about why research science is so practical and why it matters in the real world. Because in no other science, folks, are charlatans and imposters competing for your attention. And the consequences of them getting your attention could be really extreme and pronounced. I mean, misinformation implemented could cause real inconvenience and could cause a lot of damage to your relationships. So let's talk about research methods, and we're going to stick with basic principles here, so don't run just yet. Until the mid 20th century, relationships were mainly pondered by philosophers and poets. Relationship science didn't really take off until the 1930s when there were a few historically important studies on friendships. However, no psychologists were really checking to study love and affection in intimate relationships. I mean, this was so much the case, folks, that the president of the American Psychological Association speculated that maybe psychologists were unaware of its existence in the 50s. In the 1960s, however, there was an explosion of studies that put the field on a map with the study of how attitude agreement between partners could yield attraction. Relationship science today uses diverse samples from all around the world, examines varied types of relationships, studies relationships over a long period of time, studies both the unpleasant and the pleasant aspects of relationships, follows relationships in natural settings, and it uses sophisticated technology. Some examples of studies may include speed dating studies in which singles rotate through short conversations with partners to explore chemistry, studies that involve unscripted interactions between people by leaving them alone in a room to be recorded with a stranger, studies that equip individuals with recorders to carry with them throughout the day to track their interactions with others, and even studies that involve inviting couples to revisit the disagreement in their last argument while being videotaped. So, how do scholars go about conducting research? Well, the first step in the scientific process is to ask a question. These questions may stem from personal experience, and sometimes these questions may stem from a previous research manuscript. For example, if a person recently suffered a breakup, they may find themselves reflecting on factors that led to the breakup, and this could prompt a research question. After reading research on factors linked to divorce, such as unemployment and conflict in regard to how to raise the children, a researcher may elect to add to the literature by introducing a seldomly explored factor in a novel research study. Some questions may be exploratory in nature in that they are looking to describe a new phenomenon. Other questions may be offered in hopes of establishing causal connections. Now, social science researchers have an advantage over other researchers in that our questions can stem from personal experience, whereas someone in the hard sciences may have to go to the laboratory and manipulate nuclei and generate radiation or manipulate some apparatus in a way that causes the development of question. So, how are individuals recruited for relationship research? Well, sometimes convenience samples are used and sometimes representative samples are used. A convenience sample is simply a group of individuals who are conveniently able to participate in the research. So, if I was conducting a study and I needed you to be in it and you were a student of mine in a face to face course, you would be a convenient sample. You are right in my class, and it wouldn't be too much of an inconvenience to invite you to be a part of my study. Representative samples are samples that represent the population that a researcher is interested in. Really and truly, it would be beneficial to have a diverse sample of married people in a study. You would want a sampling of all sorts of married couples. They may vary on their nationality, they may vary on age, socioeconomic status, etc. In most cases, a representative sample is preferred over a convenience sample, and that a convenience sample may generate results that just apply to a certain group of students. Going back to my earlier example, if I was interested in individuals that had an intimate relationship for 3 months, and I had a convenience sample of NSU students from my class, then it's very possible that my results will only generalize to a population of NSU students. However, that's not necessarily always the case. It's important to note that depending on the subject matter, relationship research results may be ubiquitous in that it is applicable to all cultures, despite there may only be a focus on a convenience sample in a research report. An example of a variable that tends to be the same across cultures is standards of attraction and beauty. Can I pause and tell you another example that really highlights my point about convenience samples and how they may generalize to other cultures? Let me tell you about this interesting study. Check this out. Russell and Clark, back in 1978, sent men and women out across the Florida State University campus to proposition people for sex. You heard that right. How did they proposition them? Well, just read the dialogue on the screen to get an idea. Now, the notable results were that no women accepted the offer of sex from a stranger, but 75% of the men did, and that was more men than accepted the date. Now, Clark and Hatfield could barely get published because reviewers said that they utilized a convenient sample that was not generalizable enough to the general public. This is even after replication at Florida State University some years later. Now, instead of dismissing the study as trivial, which some folks tended to do back in the 80s and even in the 90s, the correct response would be to recognize limitations because no study is perfect and focus on what the study is describing to us. So the study is highlighting how men are more down, if I can get colloquial for a second, for sex with strangers than women. That's the central point. Men are more down to have sex with strangers than women are. And that point has been found to be true over dozens of replications of this study across multiple regions involving upwards of 20,000 participants to this day. You still think research is boring? Limitations will always exist in research. The correct thing to do is to acknowledge these limitations and then focus on what golden nuggets a research study can tell us. To move forward, choosing a research design is extremely important in research because this will align with your question perfectly, or at least it should, and ultimately allows it to be answered. Correlational designs are used to describe relationships. For example, how change in one event is accompanied by some degree of change in another variable, whereas experimental designs are used to determine causal connections because experimenters create and control the conditions they study. To put it simply, correlations tell us what is happening, if anything, but they cannot tell us why it's happening. For example, a study could find that years of a satisfying, intimate relationship with the boo thing leads to greater life expectancy. But if nothing was manipulated or controlled in the study, it cannot tell us why that intimate relationship leads to greater life expectancy. But if, like in Don Burke's classic research study on attitude, similarity, and attraction, if conditions are manipulated in a study, then causal connections can be made. Burke had individuals come to his research lab, and through random assignment, he had participants either interact with a stranger that had an attitude similar to theirs, or they interacted with a participant that had a different attitude from them. After the interaction, Burke found that individuals that interacted with others that had similar attitudes with them actually had higher attraction scores than the folks that didn't interact with people that had similar attitudes to them. From examples like these, folks, we can determine causal connections because conditions are controlled, which allow for head-to-head comparisons of variable scores. I have a trivial example on display here, which shows that as ice cream sales increase, shark attacks increase. Now, correlation doesn't necessarily equate to causation. Here we're seeing that as one variable increases, one event happens, it affects the change of another event. But we can't necessarily say that ice cream sales are causing shark attacks, and we can't say that shark attacks are causing ice cream sales. But rather, these two variables may be increasing because of a third factor that is not being accounted for in this particular graph. That third factor in this case is sunny weather. When it's sunny outside, when it's hot, when we're in the spring and summer months, individuals have more of a propensity to go out there and enjoy ice cream. They have more of a propensity to go to Buckrow Beach, be out in Virginia Beach swimming, and thus shark attacks may occur. I don't think there's any sharks that are really at Buckrow Beach and Virginia Beach, but you get the drift. You get what I'm saying here, folks. So I'll end this presentation by talking about two big sources of data as it relates to relationship research. I'll also spend some time talking about limitations associated with these big sources of data. One source is self-report data. Self-report data is simply people's own report about their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The other big source of data is careful observations of other people's behavior. If I wanted to do research, I could simply ask people about their experiences and have them self-report through questions, diaries, and interviews. This can be a very efficient and informative way to collect data, but it's important to note that it has several drawbacks. One of the drawbacks is that individuals may not interpret the question I'm posing correctly. For example, if I ask someone, how many individuals have they had sex with? Will they include oral sex in their tally or will they not? Sometimes interpretation is not the issue, but insight is the issue. For example, many women say that physical attractiveness is not as important for them as it is to males in dating scenarios, but speed dating scenario research says otherwise. Women use physical attractiveness just as much as a male do to make quick judgments in speed dating scenarios. Now, sometimes insight is okay, but sometimes recall may be off a little bit and affect the type of data collected in research. For example, if a hot, steamy romance ends in pain, a person may have a difficult time remembering the honeymoon period or when things were going well in that relationship that just didn't work out. And then finally, social desirability is an issue, and this essentially deals with people's desire to make good impressions on others. For example, some research has shown that some women will lie about the number of sexual partners they've had in an interview, but if they were hooked up to a lie detector machine, they would admit more partners. So, so these are some of the limitations and drawbacks that tend to show up in self-report data. Remember, all research has some limitations. Now, the other big source of data collection that I want to talk about is careful observations of people. And this could involve recording devices left on a person to record their interactions intermittently. This is also known as event tracking. For example, a researcher could give a participant a audio recorder, and that audio recorder turns on every 2 hours. And when it turns on for 15 minutes. It records any kind of interaction that's taken place, and then after that 15 minutes, it shuts down until another 2 hours goes by. Right? This could give researchers a lot of insight in regard to interactions that the individuals are having with familial contacts, people they're in an intimate relationship with, and maybe even some different types of friendships and professional relationships. Another example of careful observations of behavior may also involve eye tracking software for sedentary research. So this could involve having individuals that are in intimate relationships come into a laboratory and observe a video of someone that they love or they care a great deal about, and just kind of watching where that individual's eyes go as they're watching this video. Sometimes it may involve observing dyads or couples in dialogue and tracking the movement of their eyes as it pertains to certain elements of their conversation, a disagreement or collaborative task, etc. And another observation of research could be the usage of physiological measures. So physiological measures, this gets at the physiology of our being. In other words, anatomy and different organs and structures that allow us to do things involuntarily, allow us to function, to live, and to thrive, right? So physiological measures could involve things that track heart rate, track respiration, track adrenaline, track muscle tension, etc. So even though individuals may lie to their partner or really strive to kind of control their emotions, physiology can sometimes really highlight what a person is really experiencing, right? So the face may be stoic, but the heart could be racing. Right. The person could be breathing really shallow. So it's important for us to really explore the physiological experience of individuals as well as what we can see overtly, what people are actually saying. So all of this can lead to really big insights in relationship research. Now, there are drawbacks as it pertains to observations of behavior. Some of these limitations include reactivity of the participant. For example, if an individual knows that they're being tracked, if an individual knows that they have all this equipment on them that's tracking their physical responses, they may make a concerted effort to keep those things under control. So that's a drawback. That's going to kind of muddy the data a little bit and possibly confound the results. You got to take that limitation into consideration. Another limitation is the cost associated with these procedures. So this equipment isn't cheap. It's expensive to hook up all of these different types of machine apparatus, and it's expensive to take an audio recorder and say, hey, you can just take that for the entire week, right? So depending on how many participants you have, that could be extremely pricey. So cost is an issue. And then the time to actually code this information into something meaningful is definitely a drawback because not every researcher has time to laboriously go through transcripts of data to very meticulously go through these physiological measures and code them in such a way that they can be analyzed to draw some conclusions. So, all research has limitations. And given that there are all of these limitations, in addition to the fact that relationship research is addressing some sensitive issues like sex, divorce, communication, cohabitation, should scholars continue to do research in this arena? The answer to that question, folks, is undoubtedly, absolutely yes. Ultimately, the public needs to gain knowledge so that they can ultimately benefit from that knowledge. And it's necessary that as scholars and researchers pursue this knowledge, it's necessary that they safeguard the welfare of participants by helping them make informed decisions to participate, keeping their information confidential, and it's important to always treat individuals with care and concern. Well, I thank you for being here and listening in on a video lecture dealing with research. I look forward to speaking with you again real soon. I hope you take care, and at the least, I hope that what you get from this presentation is information that will help you be much more critical of advice, of statements, opinions, and even research that you hear out there pertaining to relationships.